approach best. I'm going to introduce you to Max and Damon from Aardvark, which is now interestingly known as Google. Take it away. I'm going to give him this mic.
Great. Thanks a lot, Eric. We're thrilled to be here. In addition to being a really inspiring and challenging advisor for us, Eric has given us this chance to share some thoughts with a huge audience of entrepreneurs, which is kind of the favorite audience for us because entrepreneurs are strange creatures, and it's seldom that we're around like-minded folks. So what we're going to do today is we want to share really some lessons about building a startup, but since we're startup guys, we can't resist the chance to also shill our product. Even though our product now exists within Google, it turns out to be a great place to get a product out to hundreds of millions of people really quickly. We still want to talk about the product, as Aardvark. So the product is interesting. We ended the last session talking about kindness because our product is actually a goodwill engine, but it's masquerading as a social search engine. So let me talk a little bit about what a social search engine is, and then we get into how we built a company to build a social search engine. So the opportunity we saw is this. Web search has been around now for well over a decade, but especially in the last decade, it's been an extremely powerful force in our lives. And it turns out to be terrific for a certain class of questions, especially objective questions. You can think about reference questions that you have, navigational queries, this type of thing. What is Einstein's birthday turned out to be our favorite example reference question when we were going around pitching this idea. There are gazillions of others, but that's our favorite. Now, if of the dimensions that you can slice queries on, the other end of the dimension might be fully subjective questions. That is, questions where there's not one single right answer, but where the answer depends upon your personal context, your beliefs, what you're interested in. So here we say, what's a good book to read about the romantic poets? There are a lot of good books. There are a lot of romantic poets. And what you want is for somebody to understand where you're coming from, to get an answer that's suited to your needs. Now, what we noticed when looking at search queries over time was that search engines are doing worse and worse at answering these subjective questions. So when you do search reviews where you have raters come in and look at how well the results page is for the query, reviewers are happiest when their queries are objective and least happy when the queries are subjective. Now, we also noticed that that correlated with, except inversely correlated with, where search revenues come from. The types of queries that search engines make a lot of money off of are the subjective questions. Those are questions about how you want to spend your time and money. So when we looked at the slide, this slide to us screams opportunity. Because we put it together to scream that to investors, and it screamed some other things too, but that's why you pitch a lot of investors, not just one. So the opportunity here was, how can you build something that would help with subjective questions? Now, the obvious way to get a subjective question answered is to ask a friend, to ask somebody that you trust, somebody in your network. But there are actually some problems with that. One problem is that there are only a small number of friends who are actually available to you at a given moment. You have maybe the small number of people on your buddy list that you might IM just out of the blue and ask them, hey, can you help me out with what I'm looking for? I know you know a lot about romantic poets. So there's a small number of people, but then worse, if you look further out into friends of friends and so forth, you actually don't know all that much about these people. Suppose that you want to learn how to become an expert ping pong player. Well, the fact is, there's somebody out there who's a friend of a friend, if you have tens of thousands of friends, who probably knows quite a bit about ping pong, but you might not know that about them because you met them once at a party and you were drunk at the time. And they went on and talked about it. So it's hard to keep up with all your friends. And then further, if you do know of somebody, well, there's a social cost of leaning on them. You have to start up a conversation with them and so forth. You have to catch up on what's been going on, and then you feel you owe them one in response. So even though friends are a good answer for subjective questions, there's a role here for technology to come in and take what's a very natural interaction, that is asking somebody for help, and scale it. So the product we built with Aardvark, eventually, was this. You send Aardvark in a question. So here the question is, hey, what's a good biking path around Golden Gate Park? And Aardvark acts like that contact, that friend who's the hub, who always knows the right person to ask, the person who can always direct you in the right direction. So you send in the question to Aardvark. Aardvark figures out what it's about and then checks through your extended social network to see who might be online right now and know about that subject and interested in answering. Then Aardvark will send your question to one or two of those people, give them a chance to answer or to kind of just pass on the question and quietly kind of slink away. And if they do answer, Aardvark will send their response on to you, and you can have a live chat with somebody. So the interaction is very much like asking somebody directly on your buddy list a question, having a little chat, except for you have the resources of a huge network of people. That's where the technology comes in. So again, to revisit the main reasons why we built this product, one is for subjective questions, users really want personalized responses to their question. Every question is unique. Every time you have an urge to do something, your particular context flavors that a little bit. It's very valuable to have somebody hear your question and respond right at the moment. You get the sense that they know exactly what you're looking for. In addition, a lot of the answers that we want are often things that are locked inside people's heads. If you think about, in your own case, everything that you know, everything that you've ever experienced, and how little of that you've published online. Think about your hometown or where you went to school or your feelings about your relationships or whatever it might be. It's only a fraction you've put online, but some other elements of that experience are going to be helpful to lots of other people. But it's locked inside your head. Aardvark's role is to kind of tap that out of your head. Now, what made this possible from a technology point of view is that when we started a few years ago, we noticed with social networks growing exponentially, if the average person has about 200 friends on a social network, that's 40,000 friends of friends directly, even before you include school affiliations and work affiliations. That's an enormous number of people. It's a huge brain trust that you could call upon if you had a mechanism for doing it. Now, one of the reasons we call it a goodwill engine is because the way that this works is by people wanting to answer your question. That was the crucial linchpin. And what enables that is the sense of social intimacy. If it's a friend of a friend reaching out, I'm Damon, and you're my friends, and so if somebody comes to you and says, hey, a friend of Damon has a question about what you're an expert in, and takes you a minute to type a reply, it feels really satisfying. So it's that intimacy between us that causes somebody to write an answer, and then when you receive an answer through this type of system, it feels very actionable because somebody's responded to your need. It's a very directed answer. Then lastly, the reason we think this is a business is because these questions are about how you want to spend your time and money. They're the things that you care about, and so it's highly lucrative. Anyway, so that's the product that we built, and Max will tell you a bit about how we built it.
So let me see, I think that works. All right. So obviously, once you're at the end of a startup and you've actually sold your startup, it feels very much fated. Like, that was the right idea. So glad we did that. We did it exactly the right way. I don't think we felt that even in the, moment when we were actually selling the company, that we figured it out and it was working. And if we sort of go back to the beginning, we actually had exactly the opposite approach, which was that we're going to be doing this for a long time. This graph's a little outdated. It shows the average, or rather the median number of years after a VC financing until an exit to be 7 years. That was in 2008. It's now up to about 9 years. So you're going to be doing this for a while, and you're probably going to fail. And this is my favorite quote from Mike Cassidy. In a startup, the chance of anything good is always under 50%. So when you say to yourself, this is definitely going to work, I'm 100% sure, you're a coin flip, which is great. That's amazing that you're a coin flip from doing something good, but you're never going to do better than that. And so you internalize that, which is that I'm probably going to fail in everything that I do that I want to succeed. So how can I, A, increase my chances of success, but more importantly, use that failure and make it less painful for me when I fail. And the goal then is to minimize the risk of the catastrophic fail, that final pivot when you've run out of money and you actually have to change jobs. And the way that we did that, and the way that I think is the only way to do that, is to maximize trials and to be patient. And it's taking a very evolutionary approach to this. It's saying, I'm not going to be able to jump from 0 to perfection. I'm going to be able to do it in small chunks, but if I'm usually wrong, I have to try out a bunch of different things and then see what works, build on that, build on that, build on that, and move on. And my favorite analogy here is actually not the startup, which has the 9-year lifespan, because most people are delusional about that. They think, oh, well, yeah, that's the median, but not for me. I'm going to succeed in 3 months. It's the Olympic athlete. and sort of to think yourself, if you were trying to win an Olympic medal in something and you were dedicating yourself to that, how long would it take? How strategic would you be in choosing what event to do? You know, if you play pickup basketball on the weekend, that might not be the best reason to go after that Olympic gold medal in basketball. And sort of what's your approach to do it? It's incremental. It's really taking advantage of sort of coaches and teammates and assuming that it's going to take a while and be really unlikely for you to succeed. So to go through sort of how we actually progress from A to B to C, we spent half a year just on product conception, which is easy to gloss over, but I challenge people to take 6 months to not adopt an idea and actually force yourself to do the opposite, to say, I will not pick an idea until 6 months have passed, no matter how promising I think it's going to be. And when I'm sure that idea is right, by the way, it's only a 50% chance it's going to succeed, then I'm going to sort of prove that to myself and prove it to everyone else, because I have these 6 months, I might as well. And what we found is that those ideas that we were pretty certain of were disasters. We actually forced ourselves to face the reality. And as we prototyped in serial and abandoned one thing after the next, and there's sort of a fun slide after this, that didn't mean we were jumping all over the place. We were within one specific space that we felt informed about, that we had certain trends that we felt were enabling us, and that was this sort of broader search space of how people make and carry out decisions using tools that are available newly online. So these are, just for nostalgic purposes, the 5 ideas that didn't make it, that because we were forcing ourselves to not pick an idea for 6 months, we actually faced reality about and moved from things that were interesting but not ultimately compelling to users. And we knew that because we'd prototype something, we'd put it in the hands of someone, we'd invite 100, 200 people, and we'd see 3 of them tried it out and none of them came back. And, you know, when you actually force yourself to do that, most of the time the signal is run. Do not do this. Do something else. This is a rat hole. But you feel incredibly excited about at least the first and the second and the third. By the fourth and the fifth, it felt pretty terrible, you know, killing baby after baby. But ultimately, it let you get to that 6th idea, which most people will say, you know, you need 6 ideas. It's the 6th idea that'll work. Well, it's sure great to get rid of the first 5 as quickly and as painlessly as possible. And one of the ways that we would do that is we would fake things. We would stay away from things that had a high visual component or a critical low latency component, things that were enterprise. We would pick ideas that we could prototype and get a reasonable signal from users in very early raw form. And we would have human beings fill in the gaps. So a good analogy here is, imagine I say to you, you tell me 3 of your favorite movies and I'll give you a great recommendation for what movie you should see that's out right now. If that's visually slick, fantastic. If I can tell you in a millisecond, great. But if it takes an hour for a human being on the back end to come up with a recommendation using some process, I can still see whether or not that's valuable to people, whether or not they'll come back. I can still pitch that in an AdWord even if nothing's been built. And you know, this was the desk of one of the people pretending to be products. You know, and it's hard to see, but they have like a chat program open, and that's where they would pretend to be Aardvark in the very earliest days. And so then we sort of get to the point where we say, wow, people like this Aardvark thing in this super crappy form. This is worth building because they'll only like it more. That's still delusional, but at least it's sort of promising. It's like maybe there'll be close to a 50% chance. And then I think the thing that we did that was novel was we didn't just jump right in. We didn't go into a garage. We actually kept running Aardvark as a Wizard of Oz experiment for 9 months. 9 months with human beings on the back end being involved at every single question that someone asked. Not answering, but classifying the query, managing the conversation, you know, doing the kinds of things that eventually we would try and do in an automated fashion. But along the way, we learned how would people actually use this product. You know, what are the things that they would need us to build in that we would think are totally ancillary, like the ability to carry on multiple conversations with Aardvark at once, but that were absolutely fundamental, where every single person that kept coming back to the product did that. And during that phase, when there was a human being involved in every single Aardvark interaction, we raised $7.5 million. We raised $2 million in seed financing, and we raised $5.5 million in a Series A. And I think that that's informative, that good institutional investors are sort of more willing to take a leap about whether you can automate something that you're on the path to automating than whether or not this product that you're building will be used by anyone once you're finally done building it. And we also were able to recruit a core team and much better engineers because they could see where this was going, they could see the process. And so this is sort of the path. You know, you start with the black line, which is what the humans were doing, full human judgment initially, but then their actions became more and more constrained, and then finally they were basically automatons. They could only do very specific things, press buttons. And then on the other side, the automated system, which starts just sort of getting a sense of what's going on. Then it starts to be reasonably predictive, but with low accuracy. Then it sort of requires human approval for every action that it would take, and then finally it takes over. And I think the genius here, which is sort of to Damon's credit, is predicting that these lines would cross in 9 months. If they cross in 1 month, it's not hard enough. If they cross in 4 years, it's a disaster. Everyone's already left. And so then the final step was really the refinement, which is what most people think about as user-centered design, but for us came 18 months in. And there, we constantly would bring in users to try out different things. We'd have 6 to 12 users a week for user research sessions, every single week, over 30 months. And the speed with which you're able to learn, the rate at which you're able to abandon the bad ideas before it's ever engineered, is attributable to this process being fully adopted. And then you also see here there's a hijacking tool where someone who was full-time could basically pretend to be Aardvark and put people through alternate flows. And then we would send emails to those people soliciting feedback, and we'd get about a 50% response rate about what people thought of that test we put people in. And it's here worth to think about that the goal is eventual product market fit. Most entrepreneurs say, I want to build as good of a product as quickly as I can. That's wrong. You want to get better and better at learning. You want to focus on the second derivative, on acceleration. And if you don't have legacy obstacles like, terrible co-founders who you hate or a brand that's been ruined, then as long as you don't run out of money, if your second derivative is good, you'll leave everyone else in the dust. And everyone thinks about the hockey stick, but they think about the hockey stick of user growth. We think of the hockey stick of engineering progress. And it's fine to be really flat for a while, but what you want is 2 years down the line for you to be rocketing and to be doing more in a day than you used to do in 6 months. That's what's going to let you leave people in the dust. So to give it back to Damon about how we would actually do this in practice.
Great. So there we are, and we now know we want to build an Aardvark. We have a pretty good idea what it's like from this long Wizard of Oz testing that we've done. But the fact is, even then, you're not anywhere near done with this process. You're at the beginning then you have something worth iterating on. So it's all about the process that'll take you forward. So here's a little schematic of what our process is. This is once we have our minimal viable product concept, and we're operating with it, users are using it, and we're continuing to do this loop again and again. The most important part is at the top, this learn from users idea. So as Max says, we had people coming in every week, and it's kind of extraordinary. We committed to doing that. You can get your friends to come in. You can grab people off the street. You can throw up listings on Craigslist and say, hey, I'll give you a $15 Starbucks card if you come in and look at my mock-ups. So we had people coming in. We're learning from them that way. We're also learning from users by setting up a community forum, letting them send in information to that. We're also learning from metrics dashboards that we've set up, split testing every feature we built. Now, learning isn't just something you play lip service to. The entire team reviewed what we called our weekly learnings every week. We'd put together a digest of the things that we had so that everybody on the team was on the same page, whether you're an engineer, product designer, an ops person, everybody knew what was going on so that we could, as a group, be able to make good decisions about how to proceed. So the way we would operate is, given all this learning, we'd say, okay, what are the key problems we want to knock off? What are the things that are hurting us the most right now? And we'd enter into a design phase, again, a very collaborative thing, which we can talk more about. Once we came out with some candidate designs that we thought would solve the problem, the next step is to say, well, do those really solve the problem? So before, again, you invest engineering effort in it, sanity check it. We'd make more mock-ups, we'd bring in more users, put them in front of pieces of paper, and say, what does this suggest to you, this button? What do you think it would do? What are your expectations for it? Then we'd show them what would happen if they hit the button. We'd say, is that what you expected? What did you want to have happen? We sound a little bit like psychoanalysts when this happens, but it's really valuable because you get language from the users, and their very phrases help pull you away from your own misguided intuitions. We also do a full design review with the team because, let's face it, the team is more committed to the product than even the most power user could be. Then, in the product development side, before, again, we would commit a line of code, we would first share implementation notes. We had a very horizontal engineering team in that there's a lot of cross-functional training. Instead of having individuals with their components, everybody knew one or two components very well, but was fluent in most aspects of the system. Therefore, it was really helpful to be able to send out implementation notes for how you're going to build this new thing, whether it's just a new feature or a whole new node. Finally, we get around to implementation, and then immediately after implementation, we're learning from users again. We're split testing to see how people responded to the new features. We're actually reaching out to people and saying, hey, will you come in and talk to us about our product? And as Max says, we get about 50% response rates. If you're really friendly to people and you tell them, we're listening to you, and then in fact you do listen to them, and they can track in your community boards, your feature forums, that you're actually building the things that they're requesting and complaining about, they'll be very responsive to you. So that last slide I showed you is a lot about our kind of product design cycle. Now, and the premise here, in case it's not large enough, is assume you are wrong. And then you'll be correct in that assumption, at least, if nothing else. Now, it's not just with the product design that you're probably wrong. It's also with your day-to-day operational process. That's not over also. So just as we are iterating with the product itself and what it's doing and how it's doing it, we're also iterating with how we interact with each other. We started off, for instance, by doing 3 to 4 month large cycles where we said, oh, there's this huge thing that we have to build, and we're going to kind of go away and build it and then kind of come back when it's done. We'd move to 4 to 6 week cycles by the end. And the way this process would work is quite simple. The whole team would gather and say, of all these learnings, what's the most important thing to do? We'd pull off 3 or 4 from a list of dozens and dozens that the team agreed were the most crucial things to do. We'd form ad hoc groups to form them. We'd bring in a few engineers, a researcher, an ops person, and say, okay, this group will go solve that problem. They'd define what the metrics would be that would count as success for solving that problem. And then, we're off and running. So that process is very different from where we started. And the reason it worked was because after every iteration, we'd have a big retrospective. Everybody would gather around and say, okay, what worked and what didn't. It's this type of kind of hyper-communication and hyper-iteration that allowed us to move extremely quickly. Now, you have to have certain kinds of people who are willing to play that game with you. It's not easy. You can't just go away and come up with your own dream and come back and have everybody applaud. You have to have people who are willing to play with the rest of the team. So having the time, again, emphasizing this theme of patience, having the time to hire people who are going to be a good cultural fit for this kind of process is absolutely crucial. Now, I think I've spoken largely to this idea of collective wisdom before, but I want to say that it's not just the collective wisdom of your team, it's also the collective wisdom of your user base, listening to them, and then finally, of all of your advisors and investors who all have different ideas about what to do. That means you should listen to all of them. People often think, oh, well, 2 people said opposite things, and they kind of, as an entrepreneur, you tend to just let those cancel out. You say, well, I can't possibly satisfy them. Part of what your job is as an entrepreneur is to let yourself be barraged by opposing viewpoints and realize that over time, you'll settle into what the right answer is. So we would actually put into our schedule times where we're going to do nothing but allow ourselves to confront opposing viewpoints. In the long run, it pays off, though. In the short term, it pays a lot of headaches. Now, while we're doing this, since as founders, we're being kind of subjected to this onslaught of information, we thought the best way to have really a common, uniform culture across the team is to make sure that everybody else is also. So extreme transparency is one of the ways to achieve that. Just like we share the learnings, the good and the bad about our product with every weekly cycle, similarly, when we have board meetings, immediately afterwards, we come back to our team and we say, here's what happened in the board meeting. Here's what we presented to the board. Here's what they said back to us. Our team can tell if we're scared. Our team can tell if we're hopeful. Our team needs to know those things so that it can adjust its own pace, so it can help steer this large ship. If you do all of these things, as Max says, you have a small chance of succeeding, and that's really all you can hope for. The last thing I want to say here is The other dominant theme, I think, in doing a startup is basically one of gratefulness. You're first of all grateful to your team for spending the time doing this project with you. You're grateful to your investors for supporting you, to your advisors for continuing to come back to more, to your users for spontaneously saying things like, I love Aardvark. Where does that come from? That's a fantastic sentiment. So if you're not prepared to be grateful, you shouldn't do a startup. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
We're going to experiment with the process of doing Q&A while doing the laptop swap, because we listen to customer feedback around here. But customers don't necessarily know what they want, okay, so it might not be a good idea. Not necessarily. All right, let's take the first question right here in the front, and then hopefully we can pass the mic around.
So there's been a lot of talk today about finding bad ideas and moving on to the next thing. How do you know when what you just found out is that you have a good idea that was poorly executed, and you just need to do it better?
That's a really interesting question. So the question was, there's one sort of pivot, which is the pivot of creating a product, creating a prototype, and getting it out there and having people tell you mean things about it, or just not adopt it. Then there's another kind of pivot where you think, oh, this was a great idea, it's not functioning right. The implementation right, or you haven't executed well enough on this idea, either at an implementation level or a team level, I suppose you mean. Or design level. Yeah, it's interesting. We had a few instances of this along the way with, not with the whole product idea, but with individual features that we tried to pull together. And what would happen, for instance, we didn't have any visual design skills on our team. That's a great example. So we would have some great idea for functionality for the interaction design of what should happen, but we'd put something out and people's first reaction would be, wow, that's a funny looking page that you have, what do you say when your date shows up and, well, and looks funny? So we had that experience often. Now, we found that since we do a lot of user testing, that through user tests you can elicit user sentiments that get beyond the first reaction, and so we can have them kind of use talk out loud protocols and things like that to talk about what their needs are and what they value, and therefore validate that there's real value there. But in the end, we had to outsource some visual design. Let's put it that way.
So you guys talked about the importance of hiring and how it's kind of hard to find the right people to work in the process. And you also talked us through kind of the timeline of flow up to Series A and then beyond. Could you fill in a couple details about what your team makeup looked like at the steps along those phases? Like how many people and what kind of roles were they in?
Sure. So product concept, there was really no rank and file engineers because we weren't building anything. So there were 4 of us co-founders. There were a few people in ops who could basically pretend to be different components of a prototype, and we would just cobble things together. Then the next phase, which is where we were doing the Wizard of Oz testing and we were actually having those 2 lines cross, we had a few tech leads, senior people able to work on all different parts of the stack. And then we also had consultants filling in the gaps. So over that period, we engaged about 3 full-time consultants and a bunch of part-time people to do little aspects of the system as we got to that automated end-to-end product. At that point, we just raised Series A. We had a good long runway, and we really started to try and ramp hiring. It still took us about 6 to 9 months to get to where we thought we had sufficient engineers, where that wasn't the absolutely horrific bottleneck. Again, mostly senior, pretty self-managing, and able to work on lots of different components, generalist engineers.
And how many at acquisition?
We had 30 people, about 20 engineers, and then a couple other technical people, product people, ops people, and parasites like myself.
Guys, I absolutely loved your presentation. I've probably worked with 20 or 30 different startups in the past year or so on a lot of these concepts, and you guys have exuded this fantastic combination of enthusiasm and passion combined with entrepreneurial skepticism. And that, for me, that really also jumped out of Eric's writings as one of the reasons why I first got very excited about this area, because I don't think it's something that we naturally encourage in entrepreneurs. So my question for you is, Is that something you came to over time? Is that something you looked for when you hired people? Is this something I can teach other people?
Well, they'll get taught it one way or another. That's for sure. Skepticism. I'm a professional philosopher as my day job, so one's also indoctrinated that way. But the main thing that gets you there is experience. Both Max and I had startup experiences previously where we'd jumped onto an idea, built it, run with it, and realized it was the wrong idea. In fact, Max, to his credit, had only done that once, and I'd done it several times, and so he's a faster learner than I am. But once you've done that, that's how you learn it. People would have told me the message before. You know, I was an AI guy, and so I'd say, oh, my algorithms are so clever, people are going to come they're going to love it. They're going to come running, you know. Instead, they go running to the hills. There is almost zero chance that your great idea is great as it starts.
And the second piece is sort of hiring other people, and I think you do need a critical mass of individuals who have startup experience and know that this is a sinking ship from day one, and that's why we're going to do lots of things, and we're going to be totally uncompromising about when we, abandon one ship and try and get on another leaky boat. And then in terms of the other people that you're with and supporting this kind of iteration and learning, you want people who love the product above all else, and we actually had to turn away a lot of amazing engineers who just weren't that into the product. They love the team, they love the space, they would have been happy to work with us, but they weren't going to use this product. And that's critical so that people don't get mired in the details. They're always after the main goal, which is massive adoption of the vision. And then the second thing is people who are type A but want to be proven wrong. That's sort of very important so that you don't come to loggerheads with who you're working with, and you can just keep being nimble and keep moving from one thing to the next and the next and really enjoy it. And I think that's critical when you hire, to look for those things if you want to adopt this kind of process. I think that's all we have time for.